Hey everybody, how's it going? Steve here, and today I have a new batch of Switch 2 news stories to share with y'all, from Gamechat to Fantasy Life to Deltarune to draconian anti-piracy measures to a cute tiny little piranha plant webcam. Let's go ahead and talk about all of it. Let's start, however, with Gamechat. Nintendo's new social feature that enables us to both voice and video chat while we play the Switch 2 has been outlined ever so slightly further by Nintendo of Australia's YouTube account. Basically, they showed off the invitation interface to add friends to a game chat session. Let's go ahead and check it out.
Let's see where the lads are.
Hey, Andos.
Not a lot of new stuff there, but we haven't seen the game chat interface at all, to the best of my knowledge, up to this point. So this was our first time really getting to see adding people to a game chat call. More importantly, it highlighted something that we already knew, but was surprisingly uncommon knowledge around the fan base, and that is that game chat supports up to 12 players. And I think the reason not a lot of people know this, even though it was published in the April 2nd Direct, like right after all of that info came out, is the fact that Nintendo only ever really shows a maximum of 5 people in game chat. It's always like one person playing and then 4 additional players talking to them. And I'm not sure why they're not pushing further on the fact that you can have big groups of players all together. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that Nintendo isn't really showing off just how extremely flexible game chat appears to be. Maybe there are some issues where the frame rate drops even lower, because if you notice, game chat previews are always like 15 FPS it looks like, while the camera video seems to be prioritized. Maybe it strains the system even further. We don't know yet. We won't know until June 5th, presumably, when we're able to get our Switches and test this out for ourselves with large groups like 12 people. But yeah, game chat continues to look pretty cool. It looks like an evolution of basically, voice chat that we've had on every other console for the last decade and a half. And it's basically Discord. It's Discord, but with auto keying out of your person and showing your gameplay footage by default. It's neat, and I'll use the heck out of it, but nothing too groundbreaking here. What is interesting and groundbreaking, perhaps, is the information we've received about Deltarune. So Deltarune is a Switch 2 launch title. Chapters 1, 2, and brand new chapters 3 and 4 will launch alongside the Switch 2 on the 5th of June. However, in a new blog post by Toby Fox, he's outlined some more information about the Switch 2 version of Deltarune, indicating that it, of course, will launch alongside the Switch console on June 5th at midnight, because that's basically when they can assure that everyone will have a Switch 2. But more importantly, there is a bonus room in the Switch 2 version of Deltarune, which includes a dual mouse mode control section, basically where you will remove both Joy-Con and use them as mice to control a minigame in that room. Now, every other version of the game will have its own bonus room. However, every other platform shares the same bonus room. So the Switch 2 is the only platform that gets a unique implementation of the bonus room with something that is designed specifically for that console's capabilities. PC, PS4, Switch 1 even will all have a different bonus room that is shared between all those other platforms. So if you want the most unique Deltarune experience, Switch 2 appears to be the way to get it. However, that is not the only thing that's really unique about Deltarune on Switch 2. Toby Fox also announced that the Switch 2 and Switch version of Deltarune will be a cross-buy game. Now, this is the only cross-buy game that we know of, so it further complicates the way in which some of us will get access to Switch 2 content, but this is arguably the best way to do it. So if you buy Deltarune chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 on Switch 1, you do not need to buy anything else to have access to the Switch 2 version of the game. Similarly, it goes backwards. If you buy it on Switch 2, you can play it on Switch 1 without any additional fees, except for in Japan, where laws require that they charge 300 yen to be able to access it. I'm not sure what the specific law is there that requires an additional fee to buy like a cross-platform game, but that is something that they're only doing because they're required to do so over there. This is objectively a great move. This is a very pro-consumer move in a time where we're all worried about prices. Being able to buy the Switch 1 version of the game and have it automatically apply the Switch 2 version to your account is fantastic. I have zero complaints about this, and I don't think anyone else will. I can't think of any possible negative or downside to taking this approach. It's very cool that they were doing this, especially considering there are a lot of fans out there who would pay extra to have Deltarune on both platforms, where, you know, Nintendo themselves are doing Switch 2 upgrades for some of their games at $10 or even $20, depending on the size of the upgrade. Deltarune is just letting you have it for free. Cross-buy, obviously not a new thing on other platforms, but it's very rare to see on Nintendo's eShop. Kudos to them for doing this. I think this is the right way to approach it. And speaking of Switch 2 editions, we also found out that Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time, a game that comes out in just a couple of weeks, will be getting a Switch 2 edition thanks to some fine print on the game's website. It reads as follows. When playing the Nintendo Switch 2 edition on a Nintendo Switch, features and performance will be in line with the Nintendo Switch version. The release date for the Nintendo Switch 2 edition will be announced at a later date. So they've basically formalized a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time, but with no release date announcement, and basically saying that if you play the Switch 1 version on your Switch 2, there will be no performance benefits or enhancements, because obviously Level 5 is focusing on delivering a Switch 2 edition. Now with the game releasing in 2 weeks or so, it may be a couple months until we see the proper Switch 2 edition of Fantasy Life I. Of course, there are also no details on whether you will need to buy an upgrade or what that will cost, or really anything other than that it exists. But for a game that is going to be multi-platform, the Switch 1 version will almost certainly lag behind, you know, PC, PS5, Xbox, whatever platforms they are publishing on. Switch will likely be the lowest performing of the pack in terms of its visual fidelity and frame rate, just by nature of the fact that it is a nearly decade-old console. So it's good to know that we'll be getting a Switch 2 version, because if you're like me and you came up with Fantasy Life on the 3DS, you're likely going to want to play it on a Nintendo platform. That's certainly how I want to play the game, but I really want those Switch 2 enhancement benefits. So let me know in the comments, are you going to wait, or are you going to pick it up? Do you plan on picking it up at all? Will you pick up a Switch 1 version hoping that there's a good deal on upgrading to the Switch 2 version? Or are you just going to hold off until the Switch 2 version comes out? Or will you just pick it up on a different platform to save yourself the hassle? Finally, before we get to the big story of the day, I want to talk about Hori's USB-C Piranha Plant camera, which is 480p. I don't think anybody really realized this. I know I certainly didn't, but it is positively tiny. In a new social media post, Hori posted that you can mount the Piranha Plant camera on top of the Switch 2 using its top USB-C port by just disconnecting it at the stem from the warp pipe. I thought that this was a positively huge camera, and it turns out that it's likely very, very small. So I'm interested to see how this actually performs. I had written this one off because the Switch 2 camera that Nintendo officially ships is 1080p versus 480p. But if you're talking about something that is so small that you can use it in handheld mode, that is a huge difference, because that enables you to use Gamechat while not docked, and that to me is a huge benefit. Now, Hori actually has announced and is making a smaller handheld mode camera that is only available currently in Japan for pre-order, but I didn't think that the Piranha Plant Cam had those same capabilities. So I'm going to be looking at this and potentially picking it up to check out, because 480p is not great, but if you're talking about holding it 6 inches away from your face, then that kind of negates the lower resolution. But that's enough about cameras. Let's go ahead and talk about today's main story, which is Nintendo announcing that they can brick your Switch if you break the End User License Agreement, or EULA as it's commonly called, through a recent update to the Nintendo Account Agreement. This was spotted by Stephen Totillo over at GameFile, and I'm going to read you the exact text, then break down what it means. Without limitation, you agree you may not A. Publish, copy, modify, reverse engineer, lease, rent, decompile, disassemble, distribute, offer for sale, or create derivative works of any portion of the Nintendo Account services. B. Bypass, modify, decrypt, defeat, tamper with, or otherwise circumvent any of the functions or protections of the Nintendo Account services, including through the use of any hardware or software that would cause the Nintendo Account services to operate other than in accordance with its documentation and intended use. C. Obtain, install, or use any unauthorized copy of Nintendo Account services, or D. B, exploit the Nintendo account services in any manner other than to use them in accordance with the applicable documentation and intended use, in each case without Nintendo's written consent or express authorization, or unless otherwise expressly permitted by applicable law. You acknowledge that if you fail to comply with the foregoing instructions, Nintendo may render the Nintendo account services and/or the applicable Nintendo device permanently unusable in whole or in part. So basically what this is trying to say is that if you in any way modify or pirate games or attempt to maybe get NSO for free, basically doing anything that Nintendo has not deemed an acceptable use as outlined in the other terms of the license agreement of their services or games, that Nintendo can basically restrict your access to their services, meaning Nintendo Switch Online, any online features, or even your hardware, either in part, which could mean that your console can no longer connect to the internet. It's banned from connecting to any of their online services, or entirely. And that's really the big thing, because that basically implies that they will render your Switch inoperable, basically saying that they reserve the right to brick your console, to make it just no longer function at all. There's a question about the legality of this, because they do mention that they will, that this is all within the confines of whatever the applicable law is in the country, state, precinct, prefecture that you live in, wherever you live, in accordance with whatever laws govern that area of the world, that they will take action based on that. In certain areas, Nintendo absolutely cannot brick your console. I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that that is something that is not legal everywhere on Earth. I also don't think this is something that is necessarily going to happen. I think that this is language that Nintendo uses to protect themselves in the case that something does occur. But I don't think we're going to see a lot of cases of Nintendo remotely bricking consoles. That said, though, this is very scary language to have in an agreement of this type. It's basically covering Nintendo should they choose to remotely brick a console. But what I really think this is Nintendo providing very strong language to imply that they can ban your console completely from doing certain things. I don't know that we're going to see many cases of Nintendo actually making a console itself completely non-functional. I think what we will see is Nintendo completely hardware banning consoles from all online services, meaning that even if you have an active NSO subscription, they'll ban it from using it. They'll ban it from playing any games online, and they'll ban it from launching any eShop games. Which essentially does make the console kind of inoperable, right? But I don't know that they'd be able to, technologically speaking, ban it from launching a card that you have in the system, because it doesn't bother to check in with any online services at that point. It just launches the game. So it's very hard to tell, but this is very scary language from Nintendo. If they do end up bricking consoles, this is just a bad idea and a bad move that will likely result in lawsuits, lots of them, because I can't imagine that if Nintendo remotely takes away somebody's ability to play any games that they've purchased on their account or games that they've legitimately purchased physical copies of, I don't know that Nintendo could win that even with this language in their agreement. But I suspect that at some point, this theory will get tested out, and we'll find out in real time if Nintendo chooses to go that route and actually brick a console. That's kind of why I'm thinking it won't happen, because I don't see Nintendo winning a lawsuit, even with all the lawyers in the world, winning a lawsuit in which they brick someone's console and make it completely unusable. But that's it. That's all your Switch news updates for Friday, May 9th, 2025. Stay tuned to GVG for all things Switch 2. We're going to have much more coming on the horizon, especially as we get ever closer to that launch. Nintendo seems to continuously drip feed new information about the Switch 2. More developers release more information about more games. There's plenty to come, so stay tuned. Hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed already. Ring that bell to be notified every time we upload a new video. And if you'd like to support us, head over to patreon.com/gvgaming to find out how. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.